Okay, so one of the first question that we received is, I eat less but still can't seem to lose weight.
Yeah.
Could stress be the reason?
Excellent question, and this usually is the kind of, let's say, concern that I hear from most of the people that I work with. And while the answer is not very complex, I think let's dive into that step by step. So first and foremost thing is, while I'm eating less, what kind of food that I'm eating is something that I should be assessing. And many times that less is essentially a lot of carbohydrates. So the issue is with the composition of food. Since we are not eating, let's say, much of or adequate amounts of protein and fats, we continue to eat small amounts of carbohydrates, probably a lot more frequently, and that's where we basically come across a similar kind of situation of not losing weight as such. And beyond the composition and the frequency of the food, what also matters is a lot of different hormones. So essentially insulin is one of the biggest players over there, but other stress hormones like maybe cortisol or adrenaline, right? I mean, those kinds of hormones, if they're deranged, they definitely have an impact on some of these things. So we, in the course of today's discussion, we are going to be looking at those as well. But typically, I mean, eating less is certainly not the solution. What I'm eating and whether I'm eating enough protein and fat is something that I should be looking at to essentially come out of that cycle of not losing weight as such.
I think you spoke about getting into details of hormones that are at play.
Yeah.
But one thing, if you can cover right away, is cortisol levels. It
Sure.
came quite a few times in our discussions with our groups and communities. If you can help us understand that a little bit.
So cortisol is, and some of these stress hormones are looked upon as kind of villains, and which is not the case. I think we need to understand that they have their own meaning and function. While cortisol is a primary stress hormone, there is adrenaline and non-adrenaline and a few other stress hormones, right? I mean, which come into play, and they have a lot of different functions to cover in the body. For example, let's say regulating the heart rate, regulating the metabolism, immunity, also elevating blood glucose levels and blood pressure whenever it is required, because it is essentially a fight and flight kind of an response hormone, right? So these are some of the must-have things which are required. Like, let's say when you get up in the morning, you need to be like really ready for the day, and that's how while we are waking up, the cortisol levels are already like elevated, so that, I mean, we get a lot of boost for starting our day as such. So while they are much required, what happens usually is, like, when we are stressed, and the stress could be multiple different reasons. It could be physical, psychological, number of different kinds of things, working in weird hours, frequent travels across time zones. So it can be a number of different kinds of things. But what happens is, when we are stressed, it essentially reflects on, it essentially elevates these stress hormones, and that then cascades into we essentially having foods which are not supposed to be had, and at some weird hours, like late night eating and maybe stress eating and things like that. So, and essentially that leads to we gaining weight, or maybe having all the time elevated blood glucose levels, hypertension and things like that. So that's where having a very close tab on some of these stress hormones is absolutely important. And that's how I keep on discussing about lifestyle reset or lifestyle aspects, because it is not one thing fix all, right? I mean, so we need to be looking at number of different components when we want to be getting back on track, right? I mean, in terms of health or other things. But yeah, that's so hormones is something which we definitely need to be paying much attention to, and we are going to be discussing again on insulin quite a bit today, apart from the cortisol that we just discussed.
Okay, Yogesh, next couple of questions are something that we have spoken about quite a few times earlier. First is, how does poor sleep actually affects weight gain or craving?
Right, and this is something while many of us might be knowing, but we do not give let's say much credit to sleep as such. And the first thing that gets asked is probably the sleep. The next would be the workouts when we are having crunch situations and things like that. But sleep certainly plays a major role on many fronts, including the weight loss or weight gain, that kind of a thing. So, and it is not about how much sleep that we are having every single day, but essentially it comes down to what is the sleeping times and schedules and the quality of sleep, right? So there are three different things which are involved over here. One is obviously the duration of the sleep, which has to be around, let's say, at least around 6.5 to 7 hours. That's like bare minimal that is required every single night. The next thing that comes to essentially is the duration. I mean, duration as in between what times that we are essentially sleeping. So if we follow certain thing called as certain circadian rhythm, right? I mean the biological clock. The productive sleep is between 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. And I think most of us, we certainly miss that particular slot as such. So that is, I think, another important thing after 6.5, 7 hours, right? I mean, of sleep. And the third thing is the quality of sleep. So how many times that I'm waking up during the sleep, I think that matters a lot. And I think all of us have our fitness watches, and we do track those very diligently, I would say. But many times I think we are not able to understand what is not happening correctly in terms of let's say the sleep. So it is not just the 6 or 7 hours of sleep, it is also that particular hitting that particular slot of 10 p.m. to 2 a.m.
Okay.
And the quality of sleep. These are some of the important things. Also the hormones that comes into play when we are sleeping. I think we can talk about that in the subsequent questions, but these are the three important things I think we should be looking at when it comes to adequate or sound sleep as such.
Yeah. Excellent. There is another question which is sort of related to the same. I sleep for 7 to 8 hours,
Yeah.
but still feel tired.
Right.
Does that mess up with my metabolism?
It does. It certainly does. I think I partially might have reflected on that in the earlier response, but I'll do a little deep dive over there. Usually, what happens is, like I mentioned in one of the previous responses, that insulin, cortisol, I think some of these hormones start elevating by design during the early mornings, right? I mean, wee hours of the day. And this is just to essentially prepare ourselves for the active day in front of us, which is a very positive scenario, right? But many a times, because we are stressed, because we probably haven't had food at the right time, or the very high carbohydrate, maybe ultra refined kind of food in the previous evening, or we might have slept a lot later in that particular night. We had possibly a lot of hectic schedule, maybe a lot of stressful working environment and things like that. So how essentially it has impact on a lot of these things is the insulin levels or the cortisol levels in the early morning start elevating beyond a certain point, and it essentially creates some or leads to something called as the dawn effect. The dawn effect is because of these deranged hormones, right? And the kind of blood glucose which should be essentially getting triggered from the liver. It starts the production of glucose goes a lot on the higher side. Essentially, the blood glucose levels in the bloodstream goes on the higher side, and essentially that creates a lot of imbalance. That leads to a lot of mood swings. That leads to a lot of hunger pangs, right? I mean, in the subsequent day, and that essentially gives us that feeling of probably I'm not feeling very energetic. I'm feeling probably a lot tired. I'm feeling very hungry the next day. So it is essentially not just the 7 or 8 hours of sleep, but what's the quality of that particular sleep, and whether my other hormonal systems are in equilibrium, are at homeostasis, right? I mean, so if those are not, we definitely are going to be facing a lot of other challenges or issues, like maybe one could be hunger, the other could be weight issues, the third could be elevated blood glucose levels and things like that. So managing those hormones is going to be the absolutely important thing, right? I mean, when we look at lifestyle, when we look at a lot of these things as, let's say, the kind of changes that we want to be bringing towards our own health as such.
All right, so we already talked about how to understand cortisol in a little more detail. Another question is there a way we can actually measure cortisol levels and the stress we may be having?
Yeah, and that's how I think metabolic health comes into play. We should start looking at things a lot differently. Not just कि एक महीने में 4 kgs कम करना है. I think that's a little, I don't context that particular space, and I think we shouldn't be even looking at just weight loss as the aim or the goal, right? So we should be diving deeper and understanding why in first place I've gained the weight, and most often than not, I think we get to understand that the weight gain is a function of deranged metabolics, and there are quite a lot of markers I think we should be at least in the first go, we should be checking and understanding, getting an understanding about what is essentially deranged. But a few ones which will help us understanding, typically in the context of weight gain or elevated blood glucose levels, hypertension, PCOD, hyperthyroidism, number of different kind of metabolic disorders, right? So the essential ones, the tests, the blood work that is required to be done, insulin definitely comes at the top. I think there is an interest about understanding whether we can test cortisol levels. So the answer is yes. Cortisol typically is tested for two different slots in the day. One is early morning, it is called as 8 a.m. The other one is called as 4 p.m. So 8 a.m. is essentially when the cortisol levels are like really at the highest levels, and that's where we capture that. And towards the end of the evening, it starts diminishing a bit. So we get to understand what is the range, and if my cortisol levels are increased, right, and then whether I need to be working on that. The other few things obviously are like C-reactive protein, some of the inflammatory markers, right? I mean, we need to be understanding whether that inflammation is also due to the stress. So HSCRP is something that we usually suggest to be getting it done. And obviously a few other things which can get an understanding about any inflammations in the body, and then whether I need to be looking at fixing those as well. It could be your liver parameters, your maybe renal function like uric acid. It can be a few other things like maybe even your homocysteine. I mean, each one of these probably would warrant a separate question and response, but these are the ones typically we should be looking at to understand whether I'm stressed, whether what kind of inflammations that I have, and how much of let's say even allergies are there, right? I mean, so these are the specific ones which would need to be conducted, not very often, but at least let's say till the age of 40 probably, or maybe around 40 mid 40s. I think at least once in a year it's a good practice to be getting some of these tests done, and very easily available for, I mean, at most of the path labs. They're like very expensive, so it's worth investing into it. Yeah.
Excellent. So there are few more questions around stress. This is another interesting question.
Yeah.
Does stress always cause belly fat, or are there any other hidden reasons behind it?
Right. So it can be, for the lack of better words, it can be a lame response by people that, okay, I'm stressed and that's how I'm not able to basically get rid of some of these things. It could be weight, it could be belly fat, it could be blood glucose levels. So essentially people try and put that onto something that is essentially not having a direct, they're not having a direct control on. Right. So stress kind of like a little maligned, I mean, used in that context, but yeah, I mean, stress definitely can impact, but we should be looking at what are other things which can be there and which need a lot of improvement. Whether my food requires a good amount of change, whether I'm consuming a lot of refined foods, whether I'm consuming fried foods, sugary foods, what kind of schedule that I'm following for food or not. And then the other things could be what kind of lifestyle that I'm living. I mean, is it too much of sedentary lifestyle? Am I doing at least any activity or not at all? Whether I'm doing any, let's say, any kind of a muscle centric activity or not, or I'm just looking at probably just one thing. Maybe I'm running marathons but not looking at strength training. I'm not let's say training my abs, core, right? So a lot of different things. So again and again I probably reflect on this complex aspects. It's not one size fits all, or it's not like a quick fix. We need to start looking at things in a holistic way and start taking a stab at that one by one. So it can be a gradual process, but the rewards are really great when you stay consistent with, build these habits and stay consistent with those. I think that helps in the longer term in a wonderful way. But yeah, I mean, stress is one thing for the belly fat, but we need to be going beyond that and looking at a lot of different things, like maybe food composition, sleep, activity levels, muscle centric things, what kind of proteins that I'm consuming or not. So it's a combination of a lot of different things.
Excellent. So the next question is, why do I crave sugar or snacks late at night? Is that linked to sleep? How can I cut down on my sweet cravings?
Wonderful. So First of all, I think we should start looking at the history throughout the day, or maybe last few hours before this event happens. Like when I start feeling hungry, I start craving for something, and the answer usually lies in the previous meal, because we most likely haven't had a very satiating kind of a meal. And what I mean by satiating is not having a lot of food, but having at least some bits of proteins and fats, typically the healthy dietary fats in that particular meal. So if our meals are devoid of, let's say, healthy fats and proteins, we are bound to become hungry really very soon after having a meal as such. So we need to start including, it can be as simple as, let's say, ghee, butter, some good quality cheese. It can be a few other things, like having a small bit of oils, could be avocado oil, olive oil, or even coconut oil, right? On top of our chutneys or whatever other things that we like, right? But these could be some of the quick fixes that we should have to make the food very satiating, meals very satiating. And we can also include even nuts, seeds can be very meaningfully used in the meals, right? It can be again in the form of a snack, or it can be we can include that in our dals, sabzis, soups, right? In the form of powder. Cheese can be again used in a wonderfully different way. But essentially, we should always be looking at what was the composition of my food, and if it is not having any of the healthy fats, we should start including that. Olives or avocados also can be another good options based on which kind of, let's say, geography that you stay in and what is the kind of access that you have. But my sincere urge to most of the trainees that I work with is to start including quality, healthy dietary fats into their meals, which can certainly help being satiated for long and not having any cravings. I think, some foods that even we can have is like bulletproof coffee. I think that works wonderfully well. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so I think the next question is more about practical tips. Question is, what's one small change I can make this week to sleep better or reduce cravings?
Yeah, and can be an easy fix. Just that again, there is a aspect of building some habits, lifestyle changing habits. So it essentially we need to be basically going a little backwards in the day in terms of start working on this. So the first and foremost is to have an early dinner, and we should be aiming at keeping, let's say, or creating at least a 3-hour gap or window between the moment we complete our dinner and we hit the bed, right? To go to sleep in the night. So that 3.5 hours of gap is very much essential to get a good sleep. The other thing is, obviously, we have been discussing for some time, is the composition of food, and having a good amount of proteins and fats is absolutely important. Essentially, reducing a lot of fruits and sweets and carbohydrates, right? Refined carbohydrates in the evening is a strict no-no for getting a good sleep as such. And just probably a couple of other things that those are required in that sense is, if I need to be having that feeling of being hungry a little early in the evening, I need also to work on my breakfast and lunch timings, and need to be having it slightly early in the day, so that I should feel hungry at the right time in the evening, slightly earlier, and can complete my dinner, finish my dinner on a timely basis as such. But this particular change can go a long way in terms of getting a good sleep as such. The other obvious things are, we have been discussing, and we can possibly discuss at length, but obviously avoiding screen times towards the end of the day is something that is an absolute must to get a good sleep as such. But these are like, this is probably one of the best things that anyone can be looking at in terms of getting a good night's sleep.
Excellent. Okay, Yogesh, the next question is, what are some foods I can eat when I am stressed or busy in meetings and have 4 or 5 o'clock evening hunger pangs, but I still want to stay on track?
Right, and we are getting into that particular time of the day today. So what all things that comes to your mind? What happens usually in the corporate world, Sachin, when it in the evenings?
Typically, if you look around in the meeting teams, things like this.
Interesting.
Typical cookies are available all around us, very accessible.
Yeah, and that is looking very yummy, but I think we should be really getting into the details of what exactly happens. A lot of these foods are easily available, accessible around us. Be it your conference rooms, pantries, even at your homes, right? And then that's where I think the impact starts coming into play. So these foods are very highly carbogenic in nature. It has got refined flours, it has got a lot of sugars, it has got number of different additives into it, and we usually consume these kinds of foods. Or even some people probably go for supposedly healthy fruit juices, which is certainly not healthy. There are a lot of myths. We can possibly do another session just on the myths as such, but we essentially consume foods or beverages which we are not supposed to be having, and instead of feeling a little less stressed, our again insulin levels, blood glucose levels, everything spikes, and we feel a lot more stressed because of that. So instead, very easy and very quick kind of hacks that we can have over here in terms of satiating our cravings. So my go-to foods are usually a good amount of healthy fats. I mean, foods having healthy fats is something that I usually recommend.
Right.
I possibly go for, in first place, if we really want to be looking at from another perspective, I may not be even having those cravings because I have already had a very satiating meal, the previous meal, and I'm not feeling hungry, or I'm not even looking at any food as such. But just in case if I'm feeling hungry, I should be ready with some of these foods which are having dietary fats. Examples would be, let's say, a bulletproof coffee. Very easy. I mean, black coffee, and you add a bit of fat to that. It could be coconut oil, it could be let's say a ghee or butter, but that's an amazing thing. It's an acquired taste, but it's easy and most of the restaurants probably serve that as well.
Right.
But the other things could be like maybe coconut chunks, nuts, seeds, maybe a cheese cube, right? I mean, so a lot of these things which are available, a cut avocado, right? So maybe berries and some curd. So these are amazingly healthy, nutritious, very satiating kind of a foods we should be looking at, maybe carrying all the time with us, so that if we feel hungry, we can just pop some of these things, and then we would be good to go. There are not going to be any there's not going to be any guilt, there are not going to be any aftermaths, we are not going to be impacted in terms of metabolic health. We may not even need to worry about gaining weight or things like that. Obviously, these are required to be done in moderation, but having very small amounts of fats also are a lot satiating. So the chances of you overdoing some of these things are going to be extremely minimal as such. So yeah, I mean, we should always be looking at fats and proteins, that kind of combination as such.
Got it. So we'll avoiding this. All right, Yogesh. The next question is, and this most of us can relate to it, that if I have had poor habits for a very long time, where do I really begin my health journey?
Right. So it's going to be a little extended kind of a response. Let me go one by one. The first and foremost thing over here for every individual to understand where do they stand in terms of their own health, and health can be A, metabolic, B, could be physical as well, because there can be a lot of other constraints. People have knee issues, back issues, right? I mean, so number of different kinds of things. I think the first is about metabolic, and that's where we need to essentially baseline our markers. I mentioned that earlier, and we can essentially talk about that at length maybe some other time. But having a blood work done, and typically for metabolic markers at least once in a year, to understand where do I stand, and then essentially start taking appropriate actions. My candid suggestion is, if you can let's say build your knowledge, that will be amazing. But otherwise, taking help of a credible metabolic health coach can go a long way in this particular journey as such. So baselining metabolic markers, and then getting an understanding if I'm have gained weight, or if I'm having, let's say, a thyroid issue, or if my blood glucose levels are elevated, I'm pre-diabetic, diabetic, then because some of these markers are being deranged, that's where I've landed in this particular situation as such. So from there, that helps in terms of resetting my goals. So my goal is not just, let's say, getting lighter by X kgs, but my goal is now that plus essentially looking at my resetting my metabolic markers, and then that can help essentially to reduce my weight as such. So It is not just the weight, but it is always being packaged or bundled with improving or resetting the metabolic markers as such. So these are the two important things. I mean, essentially understanding and resetting the goals is something which is very important, and then starting the journey with including or adding adequate amount of proteins and healthy dietary fats is something that we should be looking at. Lowering carbohydrates, because if any one of us or any one of you most of you look at your meals, you will get an understanding it is loads and loads of derivatives of grains and nothing else. We hardly eat anything else apart from the grains, right? I mean, so we need to be reducing the grain load and then start including more of proteins. And proteins are not dals, proteins are not lentils. There is a big myth around there, because we should be looking at first class protein, the foods which have more protein than the carbohydrates. That's the basically selection criteria that you should be using. And dals and lentils and many other plant-based foods have more of carbs, which are supposedly called as protein foods, are having loads of carbohydrates and very minimalistic second class protein. So I mean, we shouldn't be even referring to those as proteins as such. So emphasizing on proteins and fats is the next thing. Lowering the carbs is another thing. Then essentially getting strength training into play is something which is very important. Before strengthening, I would like to highlight, once you get into lowering carbs and increasing fats and proteins, automatically your satiety levels are going to be on the higher side. The frequency of you feeling hungry is going to be going down in a great manner. So you can easily start attaining, let's say, anywhere between 12 to 14 to 16 hours of intermittent fasting. That is another core component of, let's say, getting towards your improving your health as such. So once the food is let's say rationalized, once intermittent fasting comes into play, we definitely should start looking at strength training, and it can be in the confines of your home also. You don't need to be joining a swanky gym as such. I mean, if you can, that's perfectly fine, but a lot of things can be achieved typically from a weight loss standpoint at home. Typically from getting into that rhythm, getting into that consistency and discipline can start at home, instead of signing up for, let's say, any gym as such. But when I talk about strengthening, it is not yoga, it is not running, it is not let's say swimming. It has to be something which is essentially going to be putting adequate stress on or resistance onto the muscles. Swimming is good, but I think what I'm referring to, even bodyweight squats, lunges, let's say push-ups, dead hangs, I mean some very simple kind of things that you can do at home, or maybe even at your community or society gym, that kind of a thing. The other thing, other few things are, I mean, obviously we spoke a lot about sleep today, but I mean, paying enough attention to sleep is something which is very, very important. The other important things are like hydration, which is absolutely important. Adequately hydrated, adequate electrolytes is very, very important. And other thing that comes to my mind is sunlight. While we may not always get a lot of vitamin D through that particular sunlight, because how much of skin exposure is there also matters, but otherwise being in the sun at least early mornings and then getting exposed to the rays of sun, I think at least we are looking at that particular around us with the bare eyes without having any goggles. I think that helps to a certain extent. So getting sunlight is a very, very important activity that we should be actually signing up for than anything else. I think the last thing is about maybe reducing the consuming the content on any kind of screens in the night can certainly be reduced, right? Because that is going to be helping you with your sleep. So a lot of these things, I mean, everything is like, let's say, interlinked with and integrated into each other. So unless we start taking a stab at each one of these, start improving some of these and start building habits bit by bit, I think that's where we can essentially start seeing let's say wonderful benefits as such. So yeah, I mean, it is going to be a holistic view, and it is going to be a comprehensive change that we need to be bringing. It takes time, but it is worth every bit of it. So I think signing up for a lifestyle reset is far more beneficial, I would say, than just looking at weight loss in isolation as such, as a goal. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so we are at the end of the session for today. Yogesh, thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure.
Typical questions we saw today were largely about stress and sleep and how to get started.
Right.
You spoke a lot about metabolic health markers, sleep practices. Lots of food related practices that you talked about. You also touched upon activity levels, strength training, muscle resistance training for muscles, and bunch
Yeah.
of other things, right?
Right.
All of
Right.
them deserve an individual session in itself. How about we do little bit more deep dive on few of the sessions, such as metabolic health markers and how do you read them?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Anything else that you would suggest we should go deeper into?
Yeah, first of all, thanks a lot for having me over here this evening, and really enjoyed every bit of that. So thanks Sachin and Shweta, both of you. And yeah, I think I can think of, apart from metabolic markers, we can definitely dive deeper into supplements, because that is
Right.
something, a question that comes more often. I would love to talk about the few other things. Sleep can be
Sleep
another
can be
aspect.
another big one, yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Sleep, and even let's say activities, because people have been talking maybe larger than life kind of things when it
Right.
comes to reducing weight. I think it
Yeah.
certainly doesn't require that level of an effort. I think most of the people that I've been working with for last, let's say 5-6 years, out of that 3 years were like COVID, and then there was no gym, absolutely nothing was available, and most of the trainees or mentees that I worked with, they essentially dropped a lot of weight and improved their metabolic markers just by working at their home, right? So we can even look at some of these things, some easy let's say wins that we
Right.
can do within the confines of our home, not changing a lot of, let's say, dietary aspects and physical activities as such. So I would love to basically get into some of those discussions as well.
Excellent. So
Yeah.
let's plan more deeper session
Yeah.
in subsequent days.
Sure.
Thank you, Yogesh. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.